The fiery debate began with the SNP MP demanding Britain stay in the European Union single market and customs union and retain freedom of movement, insisting that Scotland needs to grow its economy and in order to do that it must have access to labour after Brexit. Mr Blackford told BBC Radio 4's Today programme, "I think we are reflecting many of the calls that have been made by many organisations, many committees in the Commons and the House of Lords to make sure that immigration is devolved to Scotland, that we can develop our own solutions and allow us to deal with our own priorities." But BBC host hit back and said, "What comes forward in the autumn though will be for the whole of the UK. I wonder if you recognise that you are somewhat out of step with the Scottish population, it would seem, in terms of you want to retain freedom of movement, but more than 60% of people in Scotland say that they would like low-skilled EU migration to be reduced. You are somewhat out of step with the Scottish population, it would seem." With Shaul Hussain in response, Mr Blackford said, "On the contrary, if you look at the SEM work that came through in the National Conversations on Immigration report yesterday, 64% of Scots want powers devolved and there is overwhelming support in Scotland for us to make sure that we can have access." Ms Hussain accused the SNP MP of answering a different question, adding, "It was an ICM poll in September 2017 that said in Scotland 63% would like low-skilled EU migration to be reduced." Mr Blackford said in response that other polls have actually suggested otherwise. Brexit News. Ian Blackford said there is strong support in Scotland for freedom of movement. Image, BBC. He added, "When I go around my constituency and indeed the whole of Scotland, I find very strong support for us being able to continue to have access to labour. We need this for a number of our industries. We know the disaster that we face in agriculture. We know that fruit has been rotting in the ground of many of our farms this year because we haven't had access to sufficient labour. Our tourism industry in the Highlands and Islands needs labour. Our public services, health service. Those of us that are in favour of migration, that believe that we have benefited as an economy has strengthened their economic growth, have really got to make a strong economic case as to how we prosper as a consequence of this, how we are enriched by migration, the opportunities many of us have had to work in other places. Frankly, we have to take on the narrow-mindedness that we get from the likes of Mr Nigel Farage." Mr Farage, who was also on the show, hit back at the comments and said, "These accusations of narrow-mindedness. A very clear, solid, large majority of the British people, and that includes Scottish voters, want immigration reduced. And many of them want it reduced substantially." Prime Minister Theresa May has insisted that British people are seeking a fairer immigration system where all migrants are treated the same, without preferential treatment. The new post-Brexit system is expected to be revealed by the Prime Minister in her Conservative Party conference speech in Birmingham, and she has summoned members to a special meeting on September 24, only a week before. However, during a BBC Panorama interview, Mrs May gave the strongest hint yet on what the blueprint will likely include regarding automatic rights for EU citizens. Mrs May said, "What I'm very clear about is the message from the British people was very simple. It was they didn't want a situation where they could see people coming from the European Union having those automatic rights in terms of coming here to the United Kingdom, and a set of rules for people outside the European Union. What we will be doing is putting forward a set of rules for people from the European Union and people from outside the European Union.